Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. If you are listening for the very first time, where have you been? We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major platforms. We're of course on X, we're on Instagram, we are on Facebook too. And look, I've got to say, whenever we bring this kind of show together, it gets a lot of great feedback, a lot of great love, and it gives me my pleasure again to bring this particular kind of show to you that we love to do. Alongside me, as always, for these ones, is my co-host, Lee McQueen is back in the hot seat. Lee, how are you? Lovely to see you, mate.
Yeah, good, mate. Really good. I was going to say it's actually quite nice that Spurs can't ruin our weekends, but I think we're about to get into the fact that Spurs have ruined our weekend without even playing. So that's really cool. But really delighted to be working tonight with the man himself, Mr. Sports Finance, Mr. Football Finance, if I can be so bold. But yeah, really good to be back and on with Kieran and yourself, Rick.
Bless you, mate. Listen, I always say when this man comes along on our screen, we always have a lot of fun. We always have tremendous feedback. And the thing now is with this man, he's always on our screen. Never too much. Never too much. Listen, Sky Sports, BBC, wherever you see this man, he's giving you wisdom and knowledge about all those football clubs in the world. And he's going to give us some about our wonderful, beloved Tottenham Hotspur. It can be the one and only, listen, price of football's very own podcast. He is the football finance expert that we know and love. He is Kieran Maguire. Back on Last One on Spurs. Kieran, beaming a smile. Lovely to have you here. How are you?
I'm very good. A bit like you guys. I've got no football this weekend apart from what I'm watching on telly. As a Brighton fan, it's never good seeing Palace score 5. And that was on the back of last weekend, where a mate of mine who is a Palace fan says, "I've got a spare ticket for Anfield. Fancy coming along?" And I'm going, seeing Palace getting slaughtered at Anfield for a Brighton fan, life can get no better than this. And of course, they go and beat them. I have to pretend to be pleased for my mate, but it wasn't a good Sunday.
Joe, it's been a crazy actually Sunday. We recorded on the fact we nearly were witnessing an historic FA Cup comeback.
We should have witnessed it, shouldn't we? Everybody, viewers and listeners, we should have witnessed one. VAR robbed us.
You know what's funny? I thought for a second we were going to finally eradicate Lee from the record books. Obviously, Man City beating Spurs in the FA Cup, obviously being the greatest FA Cup comeback. But VAR got involved and intervened. And unfortunately, everyone knows the rest what happened. So look, we'll leave that to where it has been. And as Lee said there, we thought we'd have a weekend where Spurs couldn't ruin it. And unfortunately, Saturday night, they did exactly that without even playing. Look, Spurs will come to Lee to start with. They've been dealt a significant blow, as they've announced that Daniel Levy's season has come to an abrupt end due to a left thigh injury requiring surgery. The promising fullback, who has made a strong impression during this Premier League campaign with 30 appearances across all competitions, will not feature again for Spurs this term. Udogie, known for, of course, those dynamic runs under Ange Postecoglou, shared the news himself personally on Saturday evening. And on Sunday, Spurs released a statement of their own, confirming the Italian had undergone surgery on the thigh injury. The statement published read, "We can confirm Destiny has undergone surgery to his left quadriceps, having sustained an injury in training earlier this week. The defender will continue his rehabilitation with our medical staff and is expected to rejoin the squad during pre-season." And that came after Destiny took to Instagram to confirm that his season was over. He said personally, "The plans of the heart belong to the man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord." He wrote, "An injury brings my season to an end. It doesn't take away from how grateful I am to every person that has supported me this year." And I think it's worth me adding on Destiny that, look, despite I think the last month that has been obviously a number of, I wouldn't say concerning performances, but I think that might be a factor that we see that he's had a couple of disjointed performances from Tottenham that could be related to the injury. But the biggest compliment I can pay him is that first season in the Premier League, new style, new manager, adaptation period. And since, of course, that he suffered that recent ban, never got booked since, which is a real, I think, compliment to him as a player. And the biggest compliment I can pay him again is the fact that he will be a massive, massive loss to, of course, Spurs this season, which I know many have shared their concerns over losing such a player. Spurs don't have a direct replacement for him. Obviously, of course, is along the lines as well before we bring in who will be probably replacing him, that Spurs this weekend did suffer a further unfortunate, you'd say, mishap with Villa now gaining further ground on Spurs in Champions League qualification. They beat Bournemouth on Sunday by 3-1. That puts them 6 points ahead of Tottenham, who have played 2 games more, and just intensifies how big that Arsenal game is. And coming in to replace Ben will coming in to replace Destiny will most likely be Ben Davies there running off the tongue. A man that Kieran's got to know, I would say fairly well. We're going to go on to Kieran and ask him before we do. Macca, thoughts on that news and Ben like to fill in for Destiny's absence in these final remaining 6-7 games of the season?
I was quite happy, Rick, before you started reading all that stuff out. You know, like, put me through the doom and gloom now. No Destiny, we're having a shocker. It's like maybe the finances might cheer us up a little bit. Probably doubtful. We're probably just going to go on more hotels. Look, it's a massive blow, Destiny. It is a huge blow. You know, he's my boy. I call him my boy. He's one of my favourite players, probably my favourite player since he's come into the side. And he has been brilliant for us. I mean, if you look at the work that he gets through, if you look at his heat map, it's not just in that left back area and also in that kind of left midfield areas. Sometimes he's playing as a number 10, as we know, inverted wise. He's playing in and around the penalty box. He scored a wonderful goal, didn't he, against Brentford most recently. And that's a statistic straight out of the blue book there, Rick, with regards to not being booked again. That's unbelievable since he got banned from the Chelsea game. So it is a blow. But as you just alluded to, we have a very, very capable, and I know I'm going to get pelters, but we have a very, very capable understudy, should we say, to Destiny. Will Ange tweak the inverted fullback role because of if it is Ben Davies coming in? Probably not. We know he probably won't. Let's be honest. He doesn't tweak. But Ben's done well there. I mean, if you think about when Ben was playing in that position before, it technically was an own goal, but didn't he get the score against Manchester United? He got a little touch on that ball going in when he come off the bench. He's been influential even in that inverted fullback. So look, we'll have to see. Everybody said it was doom and gloom when Romero got injured a couple of seasons ago, and Davinson Sanchez had to come in against the mighty Arsenal, North London. Oh my days, what's going to happen? And we smashed them 3-0. So, you know, let's see what happens on the next game. But look, you can't jazz it up. It's a huge blow for him himself. I'm gutted for us. I'm gutted for him because he's a young lad. He's still learning, and also he's going to miss the Euros. He would have probably been in the Euro squad, and he's obviously going to miss the Euros as well. So, yeah, massive blow for Spurs when we don't even play. I mean, it's brilliant, actually, isn't it? Let's be honest. So, yeah, shame for Destiny, and we wish him well, of course, and all the lads.
One thing I will just say, I'll bring Kieran in, who's actually got to know Ben, if he doesn't mind me saying that, on more, I don't know, personal level, on a teacher basis level. Ben, of course, just to give some confidence out there, can I say, Ben has never lost a home North London derby. I know I can hear Anthony Costa saying to me,
Costa is going to be battering you for that. You know Costa is not going to be happy, Rick.
I can hear Costa when he said, shut up, Rick, but I've got to get it out there. Kieran, mate, listen, we're here to talk about finance, of course, but we wouldn't be, it's weird these circumstances come up. We wouldn't really talk about Ben Davies tonight, but tell us a little bit about Ben Davies now. You've got to know Ben.
Yeah, Ben is doing his masters for the Professional Footballers Association in association with the university as well. He's a brilliant student. He's a really smart and he's a thoroughly nice young man, and has been an absolute pleasure to teach. He takes everything on board. He's really thoughtful. And he's done all his homework, so there's nothing distracting him from the game as well.
I love that. Listen, we would not have even discussed that pretty tonight had it not had that situation happen. Not that I would have wanted that to happen for that to come out, but just tells you the wonderful kind of people that Kieran Maguire gets to meet on a day-to-day basis and teaches, such as the amazing nature of this man. Now, look, this is a football finance special, so it does mean we're going to take a little bit of time off talking about Spurs on the pitch and focus what's going on off the pitch. Now, we'll start with the fact, Kieran, to bring you in, that Spurs announced their results for the 22-23 financial year, and it showed a record revenue of 549.6 million for the first time the club's revenue cash-generating stadium rising above £500 million. That's an increase of 24% from the previous year's 440 million, which is, again, staggering numbers. That included match receipts of 117.6 million, up from 106.1 million the previous year. However, there was also a loss of 86.8 million in there as well. I mean, look, the main, I think, focus men will be interested in what is your initial takeaways seeing Spurs releasing those annual financial results?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the transition to the new stadium has now truly come off. Financially, Spurs can say that they are the senior club in London. They are generating more revenue than Chelsea. They are generating more revenue than Arsenal. And that will allow the club in turn to invest in whatever it chooses to invest. The match day income is the second highest in the country. It's only beaten by Manchester United, and Manchester United has got an extra 14,000 tickets to sell at each home match. But I think if Spurs get a good run in cups, they will be able to surpass Manchester United. You look at the commercial income that increased very significantly, and whilst you don't like the prawn sandwich brigade, they're now bringing in 41% of every pound that Spurs are generating, and that again gives you scope to reinvest. The wage bill is well under control, and it's still higher than that of Arsenal. It's lower than that of Chelsea, but then Chelsea appear to have lost all control with regards to their wage bill. So I think the finances to me are very strong. A lot of focus will be on the fact that Spurs made an accounting loss. But actually, if you look at that from a cash point of view, Spurs generated £150 million in 22-23 from what you might call the day-to-day running of the business, from selling the tickets and the TV deals and the merchandise, less the cost of the wages and the day-to-day running. So that's actually as good as any other club in the Premier League. So it is now become a cash cow. It then comes down to the quality of the decision making with regards to how that cash is spent.
Well, just coming up to that in a second, if I may, Kieran, but again, articulated brilliantly. One of the things that I was really surprised at, just going off piece a little bit, Rick, sorry, when I was reading all the reports and your tweets and stuff, Kieran, when it first come to light, was the wage bill being higher than that lot down the road. I was actually quite surprised by that. I mean, we're always tarnished with this brush of we don't pay high wages. They're very much around performance led. If you like, salaries are lower, but performance bonuses are higher, and that's why we don't attract players. So I was actually quite surprised that we were not lower than Chelsea, let's be fair, but higher than Arsenal's wage bill. And I don't know where that sort of started to change over. Like I call it like the cricket graph, the scissor graph, where all of a sudden we overtook them in that way. Can you shed any light on that, Kieran, at all?
Well, I think a lot of it's got to do with European participation. And I believe there is another club in North London. I don't know their name, but I think you may have heard them. I can't remember who they are. They've not been in the Champions League until this season since about 2016, 2017. And as a result of that, they've not been able to increase wages. Their wage bill has actually effectively flatlined for a significant number of years, whereas Spurs, in moving to the new stadium and also the progress that the club has made in terms of some good years as far as European participation is concerned, Spurs have had that additional revenue coming in, which has allowed it to invest further into the overall wage bill. Having said that, Spurs are only paying £46 in wages for every £100 that comes through the door. That's by far the best in the Premier League. And if you're looking at the club as a business, as a sustainable business, what Spurs are excellent at doing is keeping control on wages. Do they have the capacity to relax that a little bit? In my view, they do. And therefore, it comes down to, do they want to? And are they going to spend that money wisely? Without wanting to have a dig at other clubs. If you look at Chelsea, I think it's fair to say, now I'm looking at this from the point of view of a university lecturer who's a chartered accountant. So the technical phrase that we would use is that they've pissed it against the wall. That's That's where they've gone. They had a wage bill of more than £400 million. That compares to Spurs at around about 240, 250. If you take a look at Manchester United, we saw that match today that was taking place, and you've got Anthony, who they paid £80 million for. They've got Sancho, who cost £70 million. They've got other players. Casemiro cost £70 million, and they were effectively being given the runaround by a second division team. I mean, the Coventry squad cost 1% of what the Manchester United squad cost, and there was more than a 99% difference between the clubs, or sorry, less, as we saw. So I think what you've got to consider is, do they have the money? Yes, they do. Are they going to spend it well? That's a football decision. I look at the numbers. Are Spurs in a strong position from the point of PSR? Because people will say, "Well, hold on, that's almost effectively a £90 million loss," and we've seen Chelsea have a £90 million loss. Well, Spurs are actually in a very, very strong PSR position, and the reason for that is that your academy costs and your infrastructure costs are excluded from PSR. Well, Spurs' infrastructure costs are around about 70 to 75 million pounds, and you've got your academy, which is going to cost another 15. So that's the 90 million pounds. So from a PSR point of view, Spurs are on zero. So they've got, if they want to spend, yes, they can. Do they want to spend? That's down to the people in charge. Do they have the cash resources to spend? Yes, because the loans that they've taken out with regards to the stadium are they're interest-only loans. It's a bit like having an interest-only mortgage. Don't really have to be paid until 10, 15 years time, and they've borrowed at the perfect time. I'm sounding here like a teacher, but they borrowed at the perfect time. They borrowed at 2%. They borrowed about 3.5%. You compare that to interest rates today, and they've got an absolute bargain. You look, even sort of the poster boys, the likes of Wrexham, they're paying around about 8 or 9% to their owners. Wow. You see West Brom paying around about 14%, I think, on some of their loans before they were sold out, and so on. So the business decisions that have been made have been absolutely brilliant. The football decisions, that's for you to decide. I'm not qualified to comment.
No, for sure. And I think what's interesting about that, 46% wage bill against our revenue. And, we can go up. There is capacity, as you just said, to be able to go up. And that's what most of the fans and viewers and listeners will translate into is, well, hang on a minute. When we start being told in the media, we can't go for this type of player because of his wages are too high, then actually that's when the fan base will start to ask them types of questions. And I suppose that's fair enough. I mean, Spurs chairman has also admitted, Daniel Levy has admitted, that the board and its advisors, Rothschild and co., are in discussions with prospective investors, as Spurs need to continue to invest in the teams and undertake future capital projects. The club requires a significant increase in its equity base because of this. Kieran, are you surprised that Daniel went public to discuss the need for outside investment? And do you think potential investment could already be, on the horizon, or should we say quite far down the line?
Without wanting to give too much away, Spurs are in play, and Spurs have been in play for a number of months. So this is just effectively putting out in public, which has been what has been discussed in private. We know that there are issues to do with a person who may have at one point owned the club, but the club seems to say now that there's nothing to do. I can't remember what his name, Lewis Joe, something like that. I don't know. So what's going to happen with regards to the trust which owns his shares? Is there the scope to do something that we've seen at Manchester United, that we've seen at Liverpool, and we've also seen at West Ham, where the club has effectively sold, in the case of Manchester United, 27%. In the case of West Ham United, I think it was 27%. In the case of Liverpool, it was 10%. And you get significant hundreds of millions. Manchester United, it was about 1.2 billion. The owners of Liverpool They bought the club for 300 million quid. They've just sold 10% of it for 300 million quid. So for nothing, they've got 90% of Liverpool, which is, as we all know, in the pecking order of football, they're a huge brand. They're a huge global phenomenon as far as the appeal to sponsors are concerned. So they've had magnificent deals. Could I see Spurs wanting to replicate that? Yes, I could. I mean, it's from a business point of view, it allows the people in charge, A, to keep control if you sell less than 51%, and B, to generate extra money. Now, what happens to that money is a separate issue, because if the Joe Lewis Trust, for want of a better phrase, and if Daniel Levy wants to sell some of their shares, that money goes to them. The alternative is the club says, we want to put out new shares to new owners, and the money then goes to the club. So I think that would be an interesting situation to see which of those particular vehicles, which of those particular methods the club goes down.
And just quickly, Rick, sorry to hog all the questions, but King Hoddle says in the group, why do we need investors if we are generating so much revenue or so much money? And he's added on there as well, the layman needs to know. So, Kieran, why do we need investors? Why do you think that that Spurs are looking for an injection of cash?
Well, yeah, that did surprise me a little bit. Although one thing I would say is Spurs have invested quite a lot of money as far as players are concerned. And what the club has done is it's bought those players on credit. So, to give you one example, because I've actually seen this particular contract, when they signed James Maddison from Leicester City, yes, it's a £40 million deal, but it was 13.3 million was paid as a deposit in July 23. You've got another 13.3 million due in July 24 and a further 13.3 million in July 25. So in terms of cash, Spurs owe other clubs approximately £300 million in unpaid transfer fees for guys that you've already signed. So that money has to be dealt with before you can go back out into the transfer market and have a significant spend. Now, of course, against that, you've got the sale of Harry Kane. You've got the sale of some other players as well, which will mean cash coming in. But overall, Spurs owe quite a lot of money with regards to outstanding transfers.
It's fascinating stuff. Honestly, it's fascinating. Again, you wouldn't get this anywhere else. That's why we love having Kieran on. Kieran, we'll discuss the losses in a bit more detail in a second. But Christian, despite those losses, Spurs do remain compliant with financial fair play and the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Chairman Daniel Levy stated that the club remains fully compliant with the Premier League PSR and in support of the enhancement of PSR to ensure the PL remains competitive and sustainable. He went on to say that we have operated on a financially sustainable basis and can now optimise the true value of key assets, the unrivaled facilities at our multi-use stadium and our training campus, which now includes our recently opened Clubhouse Media Centre. Now, you've often, Kieran, given definitely a huge amount of praise. I think you've referred to Spurs as being one of the market leaders in how the club has run. And I think given the fact that Spurs are one of the very few clubs to be able to do business in January, and you've been at the forefront of really having to give some bad news about clubs being, unfortunately, in difficult financial situations this season, does that just really further vindicate the way Spurs are being run as a club? I must just stress this off the pitch.
As a business, yeah, they are fantastically well run. I got bored. I live in Brighton and I work in Liverpool. So when I'm commuting, I get out a spreadsheet and I come up with just messing around. And when the Premier League have sort of hinted at the new PSR rules, and we've got the new rules coming in from UEFA, I reckon that Spurs are second only to Manchester City in terms of what they could spend under these new squad cost control rules. I reckon they can spend another £150 million on players in terms of player costs. So that's going to be wages and transfer fee amortization, and they would still be compliant with the rules. So as a business, it's a horrible word to use, but the monetization of the fan base, the utilization of the stadium as something which is going to be used for more than 25 home matches a season, absolutely brilliant. They appear to have a good working relationship with the council. If you take a look at some of the data coming out from sort of club sources, Spurs fans are now spending an extra 50 to 60 minutes per match inside the concourse. So that means that they're spending money for an extra 50 to 60 minutes. Spurs are making £1 million a match from catering. Some clubs aren't even making that from ticket sales in the Premier League. And I'm talking about big clubs, likes of Everton and so on. So many of the things that they have done have been visionary, they've been future-proofing, and they will allow Spurs to be competitive if they choose to spend the money. And then there's a separate issue as to how well that money is spent. That's not down to Daniel Levy's focus very much on the stadium. That comes down to making the right purchases and the stuff that we all get excited about on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, staggering numbers there. I mean, £1 million per match on catering is just insane. And then when you think about it as well, when the stadium is when we're not at home or the stadium's closed, i.e. enclosed stadium, you've got everything else that's going on there that Rick alluded to in terms of the multi-purpose. And that's some fans will say like it should be just for a football stadium, but you're probably doing more than £1 million in catering per match day when the NFL's in there. Rather than a soccer match. Dare I call it soccer? But you see what I'm coming from? It's like, it just keeps going, doesn't it? It's absolutely madness. What you referenced earlier, Kieran, about the 86.8 million losses, but it takes the total losses over the past 3 years close to 220 million. Now, the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, or PSR, we just referenced, state that top flight clubs cannot exceed losses of over 105 million during that 3-year period. And as we've seen, Everton and Forest have both been deducted points this year for breaching the PSR rules. I think Leicester have also got something when they come, or if they come back up, or when they hit the Premier League again, they've got something to answer to, as well as Sheffield United has been talked about as well when they drop back down, or if they drop back down, looks likely as well. So there is other clubs now falling foul of the PSR. Interestingly, as we just talked about, Tottenham's infrastructure costs are not included. So you mentioned earlier that we can actually almost offset, if I can use that terminology, the academy costs and the infrastructure costs against them losses. Is that the reason why we're not falling foul of PSR? And actually, when people then say about the infrastructure, the hotels, as I made a jibe right at the beginning, actually because of that offset, it's enabling us to continue to spend, and we'll be able to continue to spend where others can't.
You're absolutely right, Lee. If you add back the infrastructure costs and the academy costs in the past 3 years, that 220 million accounting loss turns into a PSR profit. So that does mean that the club in any individual window can spend as much money as it wants to spend. Now, it could be that it doesn't want to spend very much, or it could be that it doesn't think that there's value in the market. That's a separate issue. Whereas we've seen the likes of some of the other big six clubs have not been, Manchester United have not been able to spend as far as sort of the last January window was concerned and the previous January window was concerned. We've seen Newcastle come out with sort of similar comments. Spurs, I think, have got the flexibility, and that does put them in a strong position. And I also think it puts them in a very strong position at the end of this season until the 30th of June in particular. And the reason why I reference the 30th of June is that's when your financial year finishes. So we know that Chelsea are in a bit of a pickle because they lost £90 million last year. And that was despite selling a hotel to themselves under very unusual circumstances, which we don't know whether that's yet been signed off by the Premier League or not. And then they also appear to have signed a management contract, which allows them to operate the hotel and keep all of the profits. I don't know who bought the hotel for them. Very, very foolish person. But
no, yeah. Can I just ask Kieran, just quickly, there's a few people in the comments, I don't know if you're picking them up, Rick and Kieran, about the 300 million. So that's scaring a few people. So actually the 300 million that Kieran referenced earlier about outstanding in transfer fees, that's accounted for, right? So from an accounting perspective, don't worry, all the viewers and listeners. It's not a case of all of a sudden we've got these massive debts, or is it, Kieran? Like, can you just clear that bit up? Because from my perspective, it's about an accounting sum rather than an actual sum, no?
No, it is actual cash which the club owes in respect of players that Spurs have already signed. Now, not all of that is due in 23-24 because the payments are spread normally over the lives of the contracts. I've seen. I also teach. I'm very lucky that I teach football managers, I teach football agents, I teach football players, and of the three, the biggest gossips are football agents. So they will show me individual contracts with regards to players. So you get to see how much they're being paid, but also sort of the terms and conditions in relation to those contracts. And of course, those are kept private and so on. But it's not unusual. I think Spurs are very good at doing this, at spreading payments over 4 or 5 installments on an annual basis. So yeah, Spurs fans shouldn't be worried. They've certainly got the cash which is being generated from the stadium and so on to pay those installments when they fall due. They are an extremely well-run club with regards to the way that they do the day-to-day paperwork and making sure that they can always pay the bills when they fall due.
Cool. Thank you, buddy.
Fascinating stuff. Look, what we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. There's around 1,600 of you that are watching this live here across all of our platforms. That is X, that is Instagram, that is Facebook, that is Twitch. Again, as always, thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. Bearing in mind, it's not on match day, and we're taking a break away from Spurs on the pitch and focusing them off the pitch, which means I've only got, of course, the wonderful person alongside me in terms of Kieran Maguire, football finance, and the greatest co-host you could ever ask for in Lee McQueen over there. Look, we're going to turn our attention, if we can, Kieran, to discussing the matchday revenue in relation to Spurs, because Spurs do earn more money than any other Premier League club when it comes to matchday revenue. You've covered this person as you would always do. Those figures come from a recently published UEFA report, which evidences the fact that Spurs earn 4.8 million on a match day. I figure that includes gate revenue and money spent by fans on items such as food, drink, match day programs, club merchandise. That figure also includes the deducted cost of hosting the matches, meaning that the figure is pure profit. And Spurs top the list of Premier League sides, but are third on the overall ranking, with Arsenal in 5th with 4.2 million, while Man United and Liverpool sit in 7th and 8th respectively. The only sides in Europe ahead of Spurs in terms of matchday revenue are Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain, who earn 6.5 million and 5.6 million respectively per home match. That was revealed by Deloitte last month, that Spurs are now the London's richest football team, moving ahead of both Arsenal and Chelsea, who were previously ahead of them. And there is a feeling, Kieran, that whilst to the extent that the club is being run on a sound financial footing, that maybe the attitude in relation to the market at times isn't necessarily being dictated to in more of a ferocious, aggressive way to get Spurs to a position where they can compete on a regular basis with relation to actually competing for that Premier League. So look, I think you touched upon this earlier, but it does feel at the moment, based on what we've discussed so far, that the club can and maybe should be investing more into the playing side if they genuinely want to be able to compete for those major honours, right? There's nothing really holding them back, as I believe you've touched upon from your side.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I did some sums which I put out on Twitter, I think about a month ago, and Spurs were the best. Well, they were the most successful club at relieving fans from cash on a match-by-match basis. I think it was around about £71 a match per fan. And that compares to, you've got clubs at the very bottom, the likes of Bournemouth and so on, probably getting 18. So from a business point of view, you've got to give the club a lot of credit from that. I think from an emotional point of view, you being fans, and I've spoken to, I'm not young. Let's be honest. Spurs aren't perhaps looking after those guys that were watching them 40 years ago as perhaps as well as they should be. They're not being shafted to the same extent that West Ham fans are. who are being told that if you want to have your senior citizen discounts maintained, you now have to go to the very highest tier of the stadium. So you're going to lose contact with all of your mates. And I suspect we've all been to the London Stadium, which was a fantastic Olympic stadium, is a pretty mediocre football stadium. The fact that you can't see the other side of it's a bit like watching sensible soccer. For those of you old enough to remember that particular computer game, it's not football that you're watching. And I think it's really hard on those guys and those girls who've been sitting with their mates for years, and now they're told you've got to go and shift. So I think football does have a responsibility towards the fans to look after them, and that's not necessarily taking place at West Ham, and it's not necessarily taking place at Spurs either, with regards to, I think, some of the plans with regards to the older fans. But there is, as we all know, there's a large number of fans who want to take their place, who are willing to pay more. And that's what you've got to decide as fans yourself. What do you want from Spurs? Do you want a club which you can be proud of for the fact that it's looking after the whole of the Spurs family? Or do you want to be able to say that actually we're going to prioritise profits? I personally think that Spurs can probably do a halfway house. They've certainly got the scope under the present arrangements to spend more money, as I alluded to earlier. So for them to sort of try to nickel and dime, I think certain sections of the fan base is a bit harsh.
Can I just say just on that, Kieran?
Sorry.
Fine. I'll let Macca come on the back of this. He might be making the same point as me, or might be inferring to it very similar, that we are part of a fan movement here that we're definitely supporting in terms of the Save Our Seniors, where we are, like I say, part of that, to hope that the club will see sense and want to reverse that decision when it comes to the nature of the senior discount and what they're actually doing there in terms of the choice the club are making, because it does feel that it's nonsensical to some degree to basically, the reward for those most loyal fans that have followed the club for 40, 50 years are those that are now getting treated with, in my opinion, utter contempt. And, you've been across it. You've seen the financial economics of a lot of football clubs, and Spurs really are following a similar line to what Arsenal now have done. Just on this very quickly, and you haven't got to go into much detail on it if you don't wish to, do the club, in your opinion, Kieran, do they need to do this? Is there a need to do this, in your opinion, for what it's worth, for what they're going to make out of it?
There's not a need to do it from a PSR point of view. If they're going to get third-party investment, there's not a need to do it from a cash point of view. So, therefore, you have to question what the motives are. If you think that the aim of Spurs Football Club is to maximise the money coming in, then it's the right thing to do. But I think we all hope that whatever our club is, whether it's Spurs or whether it's Manchester United or whether it's West Ham or whether it's Morecambe, you always hope that your club is a little bit better than that. And during the pandemic, Spurs must have made you so proud with the way that it looked after the NHS and so on. And I think all fans of clubs, I think we all sort of felt a little bit, our hearts were beating us a little bit faster because we saw some of the amazing things that our club was doing. And then you start to get sort of into the grubby side of the game with Super League and profit maximisation. And, there's the separate issue with regards to what we're seeing with the FA Cup at present. And that love and affection that you have for the club takes a bit of a hit. And I think I'm absolutely delighted to hear that you're involved in the Save Our Seniors campaign. And I think, standing together is the way to achieve that.
I just think, just to add to that as well, I mean, I think, you talk about maybe a hidden motive or what the motive actually is. It certainly isn't about that financial need, as you've just said. It may be an attrition need. Maybe the club is looking at some sort of forced attrition of moving, kind of newer fans, if you like, or younger fans, or a new set of fans into the stadium, or maybe what they're looking to do is just to charge more over that period of time, and then they're not worried about where the fans come from. And I think that's a major problem with two things for that. For me, is one, that loyalty piece is not there anymore for the fans that have been there for, as you both have just said, 30, 40 years or whatever. But also as well, the fact that, you get, it's been labelled actually at our football club plastic fans or tourist fans and that type of stuff. And it's generating that. Whereas actually, if you buy a ticket as a one-off for £100, just as an example, you're probably more likely to do that for a day out than actually invest £75 every single week. And actually, it's the £75 or the £80 every single week are the ones that create the atmosphere and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a huge element of that for what seems like, if the club wanted to gain a bit more money just from charging the seniors more money, why don't they just keep the number the same for the seniors and charge the rest of us more money? Do you know what I mean? Like, you could have put an extra couple of £100 on my season ticket and probably would have moaned, but would have done it. And then, the seniors wouldn't have needed to pay the price. And then you're keeping both sets kind of happy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. Spurs have been able to attract a broader fan base because you've moved from the old stadium to the new one. So if that's the argument the club's putting forward, that argument doesn't wash. It's ignoring the fact that Spurs have now got an extra 25,000 people able to attend and see the club on a regular basis. The senior football clubs, and I include Spurs in this, they don't want season ticket holders anymore. That's the problem. And I think is there some sort of rule coming in that if you miss more than 3 or 4 matches, we'll take away your season ticket? Now, admittedly, if they do give you the option of using the ticket exchange, then fair dues. But we've seen with clubs like Liverpool. Liverpool's now got a capacity of 61,000 at Anfield. Less than half of those tickets go to season ticket holders. Why? Because they've got a membership scheme which costs you a good few quid to be a member of. Match day tickets are sold twice a year, and there's an almighty scramble every time that those tickets are sold. They could sell 80,000. Spurs could probably sell 75, 80,000. The ambitions of the club have underestimated the affection and the enthusiasm for football which exists in 2024. Stadiums aren't big enough. Spurs Stadium, which as an away fan, I think is the best in the country by a country mile. It's still not big enough. And so how, if we can sell all of the tickets at the current prices for 62,000, then we could probably sell them at 20% higher. And that's where the clubs are wanting to go. And 100%. What we've seen in sort of the last decade, we had a 70% increase in the value of the broadcast deal in 2014. We had a 70% increase in the value of the broadcast deal in 2017. So the clubs couldn't put up the prices because it just looked terrible. We're getting all of this money coming from Sky subscribers. How can we go and twist the knife into our fans? The days of the increases in TV deals have stopped. We're going to get no more in 2030 than we did in 2020 as far as the domestic TV deals are concerned. So that the clubs are now saying, okay, let's find another target to raise revenue from. You will buy your season ticket, Lee, until the day you die. I know that, and you know that, because football's the most important of the unimportant things in life. So yes, we love our family. Yes, we'll put food on the table. Yes, we'll pay the rent. And then the next thing that gets bought will be your season ticket. And that degree of loyalty, that degree of brand association, every single other manufacturer or service provider on the planet would give their right arm for.
100%. Every business would love that. Yeah. You've literally got a monopoly on your customers, on your clients, essentially. That basically what they've created. I know we don't want to be classed as customers or clients, but ultimately from a business set, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. I mean, just literally, you know for a fact that agents put in the group 42,000 season tickets at Spurs, according to a report. You know for a fact you've got 42,000 people every season renewing at X price. And if it goes up 10%, 15%, 20%,
you're moaned.
If they don't if Lee and Rick don't renew and Kieran don't renew, there'll be Sarah, Fiona, and Steve that are going to come in on the list. And you know, to a certain degree, from a business point of view, this isn't just Tottenham Hotspur. This is football in general, in my opinion. Great business model, right? That's what you want. But the exploitation of fans and the exploitation of loyalty, there has to be a line, Kieran, doesn't there? You have to draw the line somewhere.
It does. I mean, I'm obsessed with Apple products. I've got an iPhone, I've got my Apple Watch, I've got my AirPods Pro, I'm going to buy that Vision Pro when it comes on the market. I don't even know what it does, but it's got the World app on it. But at the same time, if Samsung phone me up and say, Kieran, ditch your iPhone and we'll give you a Samsung Galaxy for the next 5 years and all of the Samsung products for free, I'd say, where do you sign? If Steve Parish at Crystal Palace phones me up and says, Kieran, give up your Brighton season ticket and come to Selhurst, and I'll give you a free season ticket, stick you in hospitality for the next 10 years, there's a 2-word answer and the second word's off. And it's exactly the same as what you would do if you got that call from Stan Kroenke, isn't it?
100%. I mean, literally 100%. It's absolutely brilliant.
Might be more than 2 words from Lee. It might be. Look, Kieran, let's address one of the elephants in the room. A massive one on this podcast for sure, and one that's dominated proceedings so far without really being delved into quite a bit, and that's Daniel Levy. Now, along with the usual outlays of the playing squad and the hosting of the multiple non-football events and the cost rises outside of the club's control, such as utilities, rates, consumables, and increasing the London living wage, Chairman Daniel Levy also took home a salary, and that salary has increased over the year. Now, the reports show that Daniel Levy, the recent one, was paid 3.581 million last year, up from 3.265 million the previous year, and received and accrued a bonus of 3 million paid across the year. Now, the Spurs chairman received a £3 million bonus back in 2019 upon the completion of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And given the fact that in the chairman's statement, Daniel Levy spoke about the upheaval in the dugout of 4 different people taking charge of the team last season, culminating eventually in the appointment of Ange Postecoglou, along with the fact of the club finishing outside of the European places totally as a whole for the first time in over 14 years, in having one of their worst ever domestic campaigns of recent seasons. Given that you've studied across all of the Premier League clubs and dare I say the Championship clubs in terms of what those people at the top take in terms of salary, bonuses, is there any mere justification from what you've seen reports across different Premier League clubs that such an astounding amount should be paid as a bonus?
From a footballing point of view, no. From a business point of view, he has contributed to the club having these record revenues. He has contributed to the fact that Spurs have paid less than 50% of their revenue every season, with the exception of the COVID season for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, and that deserves a lot of credit. I've got Daniel's pay packet for every single year since he joined the club, and in total he's earned £50.7 million, which is a substantial amount of money. Did he, on that basis, did he need an additional £3 million in 22-23? I think it's indicative of a disconnect between the boardroom and the terraces. He could have taken it next year. He could have taken it the next year that, for example, that Spurs are in the Champions League. He could have sold some of his shares in Spurs to a third party and would have been, richly rewarded for it. I think he's done a fantastic job on the business side of things, but his decision to effectively award himself a bonus, because if he says, I think I deserve a bonus of 3 million, will you rubber stamp it? You know that the rest of the board are going to do so. Then that shows a bit of a tin ear. But that's modern day football. The disconnect and the lack of understanding, and we've seen that in a series of decisions being made, not just at Spurs but in football in general, is one of the saddening elements of the game that we are still committed to today.
I think that's where I mean, you use the words disconnect. I think that's where this ownership of this football club has just never got it right with the connection to the fans. Like, listen, we need to asterisk what I'm about to say, and Kieran, you just done a brilliant job of the difference between football side and business side. So asterisk business side, he's taken a bonus which is less than 1% of the total turnover. Business wise, it's less than 1%. If I try to hire somebody and give them a bonus of less than 1%, they'd probably tell me to do one. So actually, from a business perspective, you can kind of see where it's going. But again, coming back to, it's not just the business; it's us, it's the fans. You've got on one hand, we're going to charge our seniors, we're going to price our seniors out of the market. We're going to push our season tickets up. We're going to have the worst season that we've had for a while in terms of last year, finishing 8th. We haven't been in the Champions League, and I'm going to pay myself a bigger bonus. Just to come from. So that's the disconnect. I just think it's them sorts of things that never kind of sit well with the fan base, with the paying customer, if you like, with the paying clients. And that's where I think that disconnect comes in. But if you was just looking at it from a business point of view, the actual bonus, the actual salary then versus his bonus is just over 1%, isn't it? If you add the bonus in, so you've got 7 million quid against the turnover of 549 million.
But you've also got losses of 90 million. You know, what business gives a chairman a bonus in a year in which they make effectively record losses? So, you know, there's a variety of ways of looking at it. I think it shows that the boardroom can't read the room, because, as you rightly said, it was a disappointing season in 22-23. And I'm sure that many people in many boardrooms just view us with complete contempt. Because they know that regardless of how bad a season is, that you'll be going next year, that you'll be moaning about the fact that the shirts has gone up by another 5 or another tenner, but you'll buy the shirt. That, you know, you'll see some dreadful performances. I remember going to watch Brighton once on a Tuesday night. We lost 7-1 at Huddersfield, where our goalkeeper was sent off after 10 minutes. We were dreadful. And you go home, and you get home at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And you sort of you rock up at work the following morning, and you vow, that long journey home, nobody's talking, and you're saying, "I'm never going again, never again." Saturday, we're at Southend, aren't we? It's we're mugs. We're absolute idiots.
Yeah. Any other foot industry that would put you through this much pain, you just wouldn't do it. But football is just a unique culture where
maybe your mobile phone providers, anyone
can
do that. It's interesting, actually, just talking about from a business point of view. I had an email from a very famous music streaming company this week that basically said to me that they will be putting up my subscription by £1, right? So it's going to go up from $9.99 to $10.99. And then I just did some quick calculations. This fascinates me. I'm thinking, well, this famous music streaming company, how many subscribers have they got in the UK? And I think it was just under 10 million. So I just rounded it up. 10 million in the UK. They just netted themselves £10 million a month. That is absolutely incredible business model. So you're looking at that from that side of things as well. And let's be honest, football is very emotional, and it's very much around kind of the emotion and territorial and that type of stuff. But most big organisations, enterprise businesses, are doing the same thing. They're just doing it slightly different. Yeah,
and they're putting up the prices all the time. When my local garage puts up unleaded by 6, 7, 8p a litre, I moan to the wife, how much does it cost me? But I still do it, and I don't have a go at the guy behind the counter. It's market forces. I think we hold football clubs, in the one thing I would say in their favour, we hold them to a higher set of standards in terms of our relationship with them than any other organisation that we contact. I had a query on my tax return. I spent 45 minutes trying to get through to the tax office earlier this week, and in the end I turned it off, and I just had a quick moan to myself, and then I forgot about it. But when the football club puts up a price of Starburst by 20p, I'm there on social media. Yeah, this is an outrage.
I'll find that. I'll retweet that one for you.
Suddenly, Starburst getting absolutely battered on a Monday morning. Now,
yeah, Starburst. How dare they? How dare they? No, I do think that is interesting. That kind of comparison piece. Jeremy Clarkson, love him or loathe him, once said on Top Gear back in the day that bottled water is more expensive than unleaded petrol per litre. And actually, when you put that into context, you don't think twice about going and buy a bottle of water, but you moan about your unleaded going out by 5p. So I do think it is a bit of a context, but it's hard to argue kind of the point with Daniel Levy that the 90 million losses, but actually if the core strategic business objectives of the club was to increase turnover by 25%, and that's what the bonus is paid on, and he's done it, then that's his bonus, right? It's very difficult. It's hard for us mere fans in the terraces to understand something sometimes.
That's fair. Yeah. Look, we're going to switch our attention just very, very slightly, Kieran. The financial results show that UEFA prize money was up. It was 56.2 million, up from 10.2 million to reflect the difference between a COVID-enforced group stage exit from the Europa Conference League the prior year to reaching the Champions League round of 16. Now, the TV media revenues, no surprise there, they're up slightly as well to 148.1 million from 144.2 million, thanks to the new Premier League broadcast deal. I mean, there is a feeling amongst many Spurs fans that are out there that the current hierarchy do have more of an emphasis in relation to finishing in the top four, rather than there being more of a generalised focus in terms of wanting to win trophies. I mean, again, based on the nature of the finances and what that UEFA prize money does bring to the club, does that just once again strengthen that message to the board of just how important it is probably to all of those clubs surround themselves around UEFA and the Champions League, of how important it is to finish in Europe's top tier competition?
Yes, and that gap is going to get bigger with the introduction of the Swiss model from next season. Half the clubs are going to have 4 home games. Half the clubs are going to have 5 home games next season compared to what we have at present. And you look at the quality of the sides that you'll be playing against in the Champions League and the prices you can charge, at Spurs, compared to, no disrespect to the Europa Conference, but if you've got Finland's second best team coming, you can't go to your corporate sponsors and say, look, we're going to charge you full price, because they're going to say Thursday night as well, we'll give it a swerve, mate. So what we'll see is that if you are in the Champions League, you'll probably get around about 3.5 times as much money as in the Europa Conference. And the Europa Conference, again, you're probably looking at 50% more than you'll get in the Europa League, and 50% more than you get in the Conference. So getting into the top 4 is the aim. That is what the board will be setting their budgets at as far as each season is concerned. Winning things is an irrelevance. Winning is a bonus, but it's getting there. If you win the Champions League next season, you're probably looking at £150 million in prize money, i.e. TV money. If you win the Europa League, you might be looking at 40. If you win the Europa Conference, you're probably looking at 20 to 25. And by the time you've paid for travel, by the time you've paid for the fact that you'll need a couple of extra squad players, because you are playing on a Thursday night and you're doing Thursday, Sunday, you actually lose money in the Conference unless you get to a minimum, I would say, the semi-final.
It's fascinating stuff, that. I mean, again, it does back up that point that with relation to European football, again, it homes in on just how important it is to be playing at the top level of European football. Now, if I can come over to Lee, look, the club interestingly announced the operating expenses before football trading rose by 21% to 487.9 million from 403.4 million in 2022. That was due to increased first team costs, the hosting of the multiple non-events, and the cost rising outside of the control, such as utility rates, consumables, and increases to the London living wage. It's interesting, again, when you dive into the fact that the profit from operations before depreciation, amortization, player trading, interest, and taxation increased to 138.7 million from 112.3 million. But the loss for the year after depreciation, amortization, player trading actually rose from 86.8 million from 51.1 million, which the club said reflected the significant and continued investment in the playing squad. Now, a big part, Lee, of the losses accounted to player trading was just how hard the club had found it to generate money for players departing. We know they managed to sell Bergwijn for basically around what he cost them at the time, alongside Jack Clark and Cameron Carter-Vickers. And we've seen really the last couple of years, Spurs have struggled to move on players such as Tongi Ndombele, Ryan Sessegnon, Giovanni Lo Celso, Sergio Reguilon. And I found this absolutely staggering that in the last 5 years, Spurs have only made 80 million profit on player sales, which is less than every other Big Six club. Now, I think we've discussed this, Lee, and you've said it often on Last One on Spurs, just how much Spurs have an issue in terms of moving players on. Now, the reason why I've got to caveat this slightly is that we know Harry Kane's move to Bayern will make us look a lot more healthier next year, of course, with around, again, 85 million plus coming into the coffers, and also adding Harry Winks' move to Leicester. So Spurs do stand next season when those figures come out to recoup upwards of 100 million. But when you reflect, Lee, on the last 4 or 5 years, that's a staggering figure, isn't it, in terms of how Spurs have really struggled to move those players on?
It really is. I mean, I think 80 million profit over 5 years on player sales, that's pretty similar to Brighton's, isn't it, Kieran? Oh, Kieran's gone just at that point. Oh, he couldn't make it up. We'll get Kieran back, certainly. I think caveating it with the Harry Kane money is also makes me feel sick to my stomach. This bloke scored 40 goals in 41 total appearances for Bayern Munich. So for him, for us to caveat it from a monetary point of view, when we've lost a world-class striker, one of our own, our best ever, in terms of scoring goals, 40 goals in 41 appearances, absolutely insane. So yeah, it is flabbergasting. Kieran, we just lost you at the key point when I dropped in a little one in there to say to you, I think 80 million on player sales over 5 years, that's about the same as what Brighton get, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Brighton might do slightly better than that, but we're in a different position in the market, and it is very much a team effort at Brighton. At the same time, we've got one person at Brighton who the club can't do without. He's made such a difference to the club, and he's helped to accelerate us from being effectively nowhere in the Premier League to where we are today. God bless Todd Bowley, I say.
That's probably the only man that wanted to stay in the bloody Premier League.
115 million.
That's so incredible.
I will say, actually, about the player sales piece, I mean, some of the names you just reeled off there. Jack Clark, I mean, he's been playing brilliantly, actually, for Sunderland, to be fair to him.
Yeah, incredibly. Yep.
But it feels like such a long time ago. It was a season that we signed Jack, we signed Lo Celso, we signed Sessegnon, we signed Ndombele. This was the 2019 summer after we just lost in the Champions League. For no one's fault, whatever it is, what it is. The reality is every single one of them players has not done anything for Tottenham Hotspur, really. Let's be fair about it. Lo Celso can't stay fit. Talented lad, for sure, can't stay fit. And Ndombele was going to win the Ballon d'Or if Rick was giving it out. But ultimately, there's no chance in hell that's ever going to happen. And obviously, Sessegnon, bless him, he's just injured. He's just injured all the time. And he was such a brilliant young talent. I mean, people forget, Ryan Sessegnon's, I don't even think he's 22. Like, he's not even 22 now. So, he's blessed, and hopefully he can get fit and, have his career. I think his career, unfortunately for him, will be elsewhere, but hopefully he can get his career back on track, because you don't want to see that to anybody to happen. But the lad can't stay fit. The Celso plays a couple of games and he's in and out. So that whole kind of transfer window, which ended up being Pochettino's last transfer window, was an utter disaster. And I do wonder whether or not the club felt that they were burned by that window. It was the time that Chinga Ndombele, what was 65, 67 million plus all the, if you add on all the add-ons and all that sort of stuff in there, I think he signed a 5-year contract, 200 grand a week. I mean, do the math. I mean, we're still paying the fella. I think a £50 million contract, didn't we? Again, that puts that into context, doesn't it, in terms of staff's bonuses, as we were just talking about before, when you've got a player that you don't even play for and you're still getting 10 million a year. And so you look at all of them things, and that recruitment part was a disaster. It's one of the key things why I brought, in jest, but Brighton up, because Brighton's recruitment, that data-led recruitment piece, is stuff that you guys have been doing down at the club, the guys and girls down there, and that data-led approach now, what Spurs have been looking at, has got much better. We start to look at, but I still think the key crux is there's a lot of, brilliant John from Lily White Rose, who's one of our own, essentially, does amazing things down with the academy and stuff. Talks to him quite a lot, and he talks about kind of the crop of academy players that we've got coming through. But I still think there's an opportunity for us to be able to sell them academy players as well as try and get them in the first team. And I think that's what an academy model should be. It shouldn't just be about trying to get everybody a pathway to the first team. It should be about selling them players as well. So I'm not saying go and sell Donnelly. It'd be great to try and get Donnelly in the first team, but actually to be able to sell some of the other players, like you mentioned, Cameron Carter-Vickers is a prime example. You see where I'm coming from, whereby he didn't really play for the first team, but you can actually sell them on, and actually they become bottom line pure profit because they've come through your academy. And I don't think, up until maybe recently, I don't think we've had that mentality. John McDermott, the academy, outstanding to get us to where we've been, and now moving things on under this regime. But you haven't seen an influx of players. You mentioned Harry Winks. Like, Harry Winks got a real torrid time from a lot of our fan base. But brought up through the academy. What did we get from him in the end? 10 million. And actually, if you go and produce every few years, if you're producing 10 million here, 12 million there, 12 million there, 15 million there from the academy, that's where your bottom line is going to strengthen you to go out and buy the bigger, maybe better players for the first team. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, fascinating points there. Or if you're in Kieran's case, that you have a regeneration of staff turnover every season, which again is just fascinating the nature of Brighton, right, Kieran?
It is, but you can't keep your head above water. You can get away with that for a couple of seasons.
Yeah.
And you can only have so many managers go. You can only have so many directors of football go. You can only have so many chief scouts go. And eventually, we've seen what happened. Southampton did that 10 years ago. Bale, Lallana, and so on. All of the good things that they were doing. And I know they're one of their directors of football on a personal level. And he said, you can't keep panning for gold and finding gold. It doesn't work like that. And gravity will take you down. So we're enjoying the ride, but in 2 or 3 years' time, it's going to be another club in the Premier League that are the new Brighton, the new Brentford, and so on. Until that does happen, I'll enjoy it. But Brighton's ambitions aren't the same as those of yours at Spurs. We're not. For us, getting to the last 16 of the Europa League, best season in the club's history. For you, it would be pretty mediocre. And I do think that there's a challenge that you've got at Spurs, is that ultimately you're probably going to have the 4th, 5th, or 6th highest, probably the 5th or 6th highest wage bill in the Premier League. How's that going to win you trophies? Because football's a money game, and the talent follows the money.
Yep.
I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it operates in all our industries. If somebody offers me a 50% pay rise, I'm off. Doesn't mean I don't like where I'm working at present, but it is, and especially with footballers have short careers, and they want to win trophies as well.
They want to win, exactly that. I mean, you look at Man City. It's very, very difficult, isn't it, to argue the likes of Carl Walker leaving Hotspur. I love Carl Walker. You know I do. I absolutely loved him.
First show.
He won at City. He's done the treble. He's done doubles. He's done 5, 6 Premier Leagues, whatever he's done. I mean, and in that time, Spurs have won 0. Absolutely nothing since he left. And it's very difficult. Kane, he goes to Bayern. He hasn't won. We know he hasn't won the Bundesliga, but he might go and win the big one. He might go and get big trophy with the big ears. And actually he goes away, and it's very difficult, isn't it? Christian Eriksen left, he won a trophy. You know what I mean? Like they a lot of the players leave, they win trophies. Clinton NG leaves, and he win a trophy. Do you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't make the stuff up. So I think you make a good point. The thing that worries me the most is when you look at the finances, when you look at the 5th, 6th wages, higher wages bill. When you look at the league positions, when you pull all of that together, we are about fourth, fifth, sixth. That's where we are. That's actually where we are. If you look at the amount of times that we finish, our average finishing position in the Premier League, and this is through the 90s, some of the 90s as well, by the way, fans. Right, let's be fair. We finish fifth on average. It's kind of our place, right? And it feels like that's where we're happy to be as a club. Does that make sense, lads?
It makes total sense. I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? The fact that we're happy to be there.
We want to go bigger than that, don't we? Do you know what I mean? As Kieran said, it kind of that's where we're at. If you kind of look at Spurs, someone go, well, they're about fifth or sixth. That's kind of where people say we are.
But if you then say, well, hold on, let's be honest, Spurs are never going to have the global fan base of Manchester United or Liverpool, rightly or wrongly. Let's cut the crap a bit. So your aim is to be the biggest club in London, and probably the third or fourth biggest club in the Premier League. Manchester City, how they got there is a separate discussion, and we can talk about that for hours. But that took place 15 years ago. It's no point, grizzling about it. And they are now building a global fan base. So Spurs have got to be the biggest team in London, and with the stadium. And here I think, by all means, criticise Daniel Levy and the board on the footballing side of things. What he's done is that he's given you the tools to which you can be the biggest club in London. You've got a big fan base. I teach in Cyprus quite often. Huge Spurs fan base whenever I go there. You've got an international fan base as well. I teach in the States. I teach in an awful lot of places. So I'm fully aware that Spurs.
We're big in Australia now, Kieran. We are big in Australia.
Yeah,
we've got
Korea.
Big edge.
So there's lots of positives, but I don't think Manchester City, if their circumstances change as a result of the 115 charges, means that Spurs could potentially become the third biggest club in the Premier League in terms of its ability to be a business in terms of revenues. But even so, you've then got to go and punch above your weight to win trophies.
It's fascinating stuff. It is
really fascinating. I mean, there was a big jump in commercial revenues, Kieran, from sponsorship, merchandising, other revenues such as third-party events we talked about, visitor attractions, all of the conferences and the events that's been held, along with Beyonce concerts, all sorts of stuff going on. Also, the return of the lucrative pre-season tour to South Korea. We've just been talking about being international. I mean, that tour in the summer was unbelievable. All of which increased the revenue to 227.7 million from a mere 183.5 million before. So the stadium has enabled to stage and a variety of major events. We just talked about the NFL, the boxing, the rugby, all this stuff that's been going on. Many fans feel providing the club is investing their money back into the squad, which comes back to your point you made earlier about kind of, we've got the money, but what we're going to do with it. That's quite nice for the fans. But what's your take, Kieran, on the way the club, I suppose, facilitating all of the key things outside of football, outside of the match day? Do you think that's being run really well?
Yeah, I don't think it could be done much better. Even the little things, and I think Daniel Levy is known for being an incredible micromanager, which has pluses and minuses if you're being managed by him at the time. And again, we both know enough people in the industry to say that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The fact that Spurs have got more price points for season tickets than any other club in the Premier League, which Brighton, we've got 4 or 5. Spurs is about 14, 15. And every time you go, you every 10 yards closer to the halfway line, right, we're going to extract a few more quid out of you. So I think what they've done there is a textbook. It's a fantastic case study. It's an incredible demonstration on how to monetize a business. They've taken a leaf out of the American playbook when it comes to revenue generation. So on that side of things, you've got to give the club a lot of credit. And yes, we talk about the lack of investment in players, but I'm looking at my spreadsheet here. the average wage for a Spurs player in 2014, £46,000 a week. 2023, we're looking at an average of 116. So the money is being spent on the talent. In 5 out of the last 6 seasons, Spurs have spent more than £100 million on players. You look at the net spend over that period, and we're talking close to £500 million. So on the footballing side, the money's been spent. How well it's been spent, you're the guys with those answers, not me.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I mentioned that data piece earlier, because there's no doubt, Rick, I don't know what you think here. There's no doubt that the recruitment most recently, probably since Parity cooking in the background, is definitely been better than it has been for previous probably 5 years. And that is key, isn't it? So, wow. I mean, that's an eye-watering figure. £500 million net spend.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It is incredible. What I just want to do, Kieran, we had a couple of comments that have come in before we just veer away from Spurs. Because look, the man, he's not only to talk about Tottenham, we've got to cover a couple of other aspects that, we don't always get the pleasure of Kieran's time. So it'd be wrong for us to not ask him a couple of final questions in terms of what's happening outside of Spurs. And yes, there are clubs that exist outside of Spurs, but we brought our whole life towards Spurs. At the nature of what is happening in and around us. Stadium naming rights, Kieran, that's gone fairly quiet at the moment. I don't know whether you've heard anything at all with relation to if there's any update on that. I mean, as we know with Tottenham, there was a time where they were really seeming to keep pushing the stadium naming rights. There was links towards the likes of Google. I'm led to believe that were at one point potentially interested. Although Spurs seem to have now really used that kind of name, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, as a benefit, as a real selling point. So maybe the question I'm going to ask you is that now more the emphasis about having the name out there rather than really actually wanting a stadium naming rights provider at this moment in time? What do you think we are with that?
If the money's right, the naming rights will go. I also have heard about deals that have been, we've got people in the room, and perhaps there's been an unwillingness on one side to drop the asking price. And also, if you're going to do a naming rights deal for a stadium, you've got to get in there early. So, we've got the Emirates and the Etihad. They've been going for some time. Again, at Brighton, we've had the Amex since the day the stadium was opened. Every year that the naming rights deal doesn't take place is one further year in which the price is going to be lowered. Because when I go to Bolton, I'm going to the Reebok. If I'm going to Coventry, I'm going to the Rico. I know it's God knows what is it. The Bolton's now the Tough Sheet. I have to say that very, very carefully. The Tough Sheet. Stadium.
I think they did a local, didn't they? There was a Bolton County Council or something at one point. It was quite strange, wasn't it?
And the money is buttons, because you don't actually get that much recognition. So I think Spurs were looking for around about 20 million a year. Nobody was willing to pay that. They weren't sure they were getting 20 million pounds a year worth of benefits. Is that an overprice? I think Everton were hoping to get 20 million a year from a mysterious Russian guy who was a friend of Vladimir Putin. But I don't think that deal was on the cards anymore. So, who knows? I think Spurs were probably looking for market value. The Putin PAL money we're not quite sure where it was coming from in the first place. So I think they will struggle to get high value money. Could they therefore actually say we're going to keep it as the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium or White Hart Lane, as I refer to it? I'm an old school fan. And then what you're able to do is you can go to your financial services partner and say, well, look, because it's not the Barclays Stadium, you can have the financial services deal, and we'll get 4 or 5 million from you a year. So actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you've still got all of your individual sponsors, and their brand becomes more prominent because the name of the stadium doesn't become prominent. And the Premier League's taken exactly the same approach. Because remember, it used to be what, the Canon Premier League and the Barclays Premier League, and it's no longer that.
Wasn't it Carling?
Carling. It was
Carling,
Carling,
yeah.
Carling,
Carling
yeah.
Cup, but also the Carling Premiership, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hell.
But the Premier League now works out that it makes more money from having individual small sponsors than one big sponsor with effectively a naming rights of the overall product.
Yeah,
It's interesting stuff. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one that always comes up when we have you on. So listen, thank you so much for answering that. Right, I'm going to hand back over to Lee as we have a quick cut of fire questions in relation to some of these other clubs and what's going on there.
Well, I think, look, most people that are football fans or even outside of football fans will be interested in the financial fair play regulations or the PSR or however you want to call them now. And obviously the points deductions that's happened to the likes of Everton, to Nottingham Forest, as we talked about. Sheffield United's got a bang on the wrist for going back down, and Leicester when they come back up. Why isn't City, who have essentially or allegedly, I don't even know how I say that. I think maybe allegedly, although they might have been charged with 115 separate breaches of the Premier League's financial fair play regulations. Why haven't they been charged? The charges date all the way back to 2009. They run until 2018, in which time City won 7 major honours, including 3 league titles. And according to the Premier League, Man City allegedly broke the rules over 9 seasons. They allegedly didn't provide accurate information, financial information. How do you see this playing out? I mean, I'm asking you a direct question. Is it because they've got very, very good lawyers?
That they do have very, very good lawyers. I do think that the Premier League, to a certain extent, has shot itself in the foot. It's been so desperate to prove to anybody and everybody that it can run its own affairs, and therefore we don't need an independent regulator, that when the charges were given to Manchester City were completely unaware. They were completely taken aback. They were literally just served papers. If we take a look at the points deductions for Forest and Everton and so on, the club was aware, has been in negotiation with the Premier League beforehand, and then it knew what was coming. I was contacted by a very senior source, for example, 48 hours before the Everton 2 points deduction a couple of weeks ago took place, and I was told that. If I'm being told that, and let's face it, I'm just a teacher, then things are getting out. In the case of Manchester City, there's a complete lockdown, and where I think the Premier League have really sort of screwed up is that, as I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, if somebody gives you 115 charges, then your defence team has to be given the time to put together 115 defences. That's going to take two and a half years. So, we're going to be having this conversation talking about Spurs 23-24 accounts in 12 months' time. I think there's no more than a 50-50 chance that we'll have had the verdict in respect of Manchester City by then. And then if you take a look at those charges, the burden of proof has to be ridiculously high, because what the Premier League is saying, in effect, is that there has been a systematic act of fraud taking place at senior levels of Manchester City, also with regards to some of the club's commercial partners, some of which are listed companies, that the auditors presumably were either so incompetent that they didn't spot these or have been in this themselves. If you're going to come up with those types of charges, and if those charges are proven guilty, then surely the Manchester City Board of Directors has no response other than to resign, because it's corporate fraud. Then you've got to have a hell of a lot of proof. And therefore, building that case is going to be difficult for the Premier League. Manchester City are going to go all guns blazing to defend themselves. And yes, we talk about 115 charges, but there's actually really only 3. First of all, Manchester City artificially inflated the money coming into the club. Effectively, money coming from the owner, it's disguised as sponsorship money.
Yeah.
There's pieces of paper which say otherwise. There's emails which perhaps contradict those. So burden of proof's got to be really high. I think Manchester City are actually in a broadly strong position with regards to that. The second set of charges is that Manchester City has spent money and somebody else has picked up the tab. So in the case of Mancini, £1.6 million a year contract with Manchester City, at the same time, a £1.6 million a year contract to train a club in Abu Dhabi, where he was only needed there for 4 days. I think on those particular issues, Manchester City might have a slightly weaker case.
I tell you what, that's good money, isn't it, Kieran? If you can get that, I tell you,
and
4 days work, 1.6 mil. Even Daniel Levy might take that.
Only if he gets a bonus on top.
Oh dear. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, like you say there, Kieran, we'll see how it plays out. And look, interestingly, lots of comments coming in. Just touching upon Chelsea, if you don't mind, and maybe Newcastle. This chap here says, interested to hear what Kieran thinks of Chelsea selling their hotel to offset PSR charges. Apparently, they're basically selling the whole hotel to themselves. I mean, Chelsea looks like another. I mean, that could be. Sure, I don't know if you do a Chelsea podcast, but my God, I mean, we try and limit you to about an hour, 20 minutes on here. You'd be about 4 or 5 hours over there just starting over there. So, where do you think we are with Chelsea, with Newcastle, in terms of potential repercussions for them in the future, and maybe touching upon that as a whole with a new principal financial rules coming in from next season? How do you think it's going to impact those kind of clubs, and whether it's maybe a benefit to Tottenham if it would be one, in your opinion?
I think Spurs are in a really good position with the new rules because it's a soft wage cap. In relation to Chelsea, you are exactly right in the sense that they have sold the stadium to another part of the Clear Lake Bowley consortium. They have then signed a management contract to run the hotel. So they're going to take all the profits, and they've made all of the profit from the sale of the stadium. They get all the profits back from the running of the stadium. Those rules, or those type of transactions would be outlawed for FFP purposes in the EFL. The EFL changed its rules in 2020. They would be outlawed in UEFA competition as well, because they're related party transactions and asset sales are excluded. The Premier League has had 4 or 5 years to say, we think they should be outlawed as well. What you've got to ask yourself is, why has there been no appetite from Premier League clubs to tighten up its own rules? Why? Yeah, this loophole has been there. Why has the Premier League not been watching what its clubs are up to? There's a second issue in respect of Chelsea, is that if you do sell an asset to somebody close to the club, you've got to ask Premier League permission in advance, and you've got to give the paperwork to the Premier League and have it signed off within 10 days. Well, that hotel was sold before the 30th of June 2023. We're now in April 2024. It's 10 months later. Perhaps Chelsea's posted it second class, because in which case it's not yet arrived. Who knows? But something's not quite right. And again, I'm very privileged. I've got a good relationship with quite senior journalists now in the world of sport and finance. They've asked the Premier League, and the Premier League won't give them an answer. Why not? Why is this lack of transparency? And if I was Nottingham Forest or Everton, I would be absolutely furious, because if Chelsea have effectively, for want of a better phrase, gotten away with it, surely it makes a mockery of all the rules. And on the basis of, if it's going to be, it's a 1 point deduction for every £6.5 million over the PSR limit, and presumably this hotel sale will have just put Chelsea on the right side of things, and you get a 3 point deduction for breaking the rules. Well, 76 million is 12 times 6.5 plus 3 points. Chelsea should have had a 15 point deduction.
Where would that put? Let's do the calculations on the table. It ain't in the bottom three.
It's not, but
send them down. Send them down.
Get them down.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, just very quickly, Kieran.
Sorry, Rick, just quickly. If I can bounce back to City, because I actually interrupted you, Kieran, and then Rick went on to the next segment. But the third charge, you were talking about charges for Man City, and we were just getting to the crescendo of the charge, and then we went off.
That was my fault.
What was the third charge, Kieran?
Well, the third charge is non-cooperation with the investigation into Manchester City's financial affairs. Now, what Manchester City will say is that because the investigation is on the back of a hacked email, why should we cooperate with somebody that's been hacking our IT system? So I think Manchester City, I think that they're on reasonably strong grounds on charges 1 and 3 to be successful. Charges section 2, the parking costs elsewhere, I think could be more challenging. But then we could have this really daft situation in which you work out how much money has been allegedly paid to staff by third parties, and it works out that it's 10 or 15 million pounds over 8 years, and it actually has no impact whatsoever. So you could find that that Manchester City end up guilty, but they've not actually breached the PSR limits, and therefore they'll get a fine or they'll get told sat on the naughty step. And I think club fans of other clubs will be. I think Twitter will be an interesting place to be that day.
For sure. But actually, so then just flicking back to Chelsea, but it feels like based on this conversation, the information that's out there that maybe you have, is that Chelsea may be in a more precarious situation, or should be in a more precarious situation.
Well, if the Premier League's not outlawed the rules, then in the broad principle of what Chelsea have done is okay. It then comes down to, was the hotel genuinely worth £76 million more than it was in Chelsea's books, and therefore they could book that profit? And we've seen in the Chelsea accounts themselves, and for heaven's sake, I'm sure all the listeners here and watchers have got far more interesting lives than I have, but it actually physically says in the Chelsea accounts, in the small print, the Premier League might come to a different conclusion, and therefore we have to highlight this as a potential risk in relation to the club, which opens a further can of worms.
Yeah, there's definitely another can of worms there for sure. But maybe that makes the sale of Conor Gallagher a little bit more stronger for us mere fans, just wanting better players to come to the club. And some won't want Conor, I'm sure, and some will. But yeah, I'm sure. Sorry, over to you, Buzz.
No, listen. What it does do for Kieran is, listen. I think at the time we had Kieran around here about 5-6 years ago, I just find it incredible that the man's rise. That as I said at the start of the show, the man's so in demand now. And I just think, not to scare you, Kieran, I think your services are going to be, when we speak to you the next year, well, for next year's and then the years after that. I don't know how you have to somehow kind of clone loads of these Kieran Maguires to be in different places at different times because of what is going on in the football world. It's just insane, right? I mean, insane.
Well, last year I did 800 interviews for TV, radio, newspapers, and podcasts. I do have a full-time job. I do just about have a marriage. I could vouch for you on that. Listen, I mean, if yours, you're what about yours? God knows what mine must be like. It is, and it's bizarre. I get people contacting me at the university where I teach, on LinkedIn and so on, and I want your job. They're going. I'm going. I work a 70-hour week. You don't want my job. Yeah. It's nuts.
It's fascinating, Joe. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, look, tying it back, if we can, to Spurs. I would want to hand over to Lee if I can to close it on this, obviously, final part of it. Lee, I'll throw back over to you if we can, if you don't mind, my man.
Yeah, for sure, mate. So finally, we look at the status quo of the league, Kieran. You've got kind of Man City and Newcastle both having state ownership, along with the amount of money being pumped into Chelsea, is it by Blue Co., along with Man United's new investment from Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. The fact that Liverpool, you just mentioned them, they are, and Arsenal, let's be honest, they continue to spend. They are also stalwarts of English football, arguably a huge brand. How important in footballing terms is it for Spurs to try and obtain the investment that we discussed earlier on in the show to be able to compete at the highest level? And I suppose more importantly, and we've said it all night, all the comments, if you're listening to this back on your morning commute tomorrow, the listeners, it's always the same thing. When are we going to get trophies or compete at the level to be able to get trophies? Like, what do you think, Kieran, is important for us to be able to do to be in that mix? Because it's just getting harder, isn't it? Let's be fair.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be the bringer of good news here. What we are in a position in is that you've got to run to stand still. In the sense that Spurs having, Spurs' average wage bill has gone from £100 million to £250 million over the course of a decade. That's a ridiculous rise. How many of us have had 150% pay rises over the last 10 years in our jobs? And yet Manchester City's wage bill is 430 million. Chelsea's wage bill is over 400 million. Now it will go down this year because they're not in Europe, but Spurs are still 100 to 150 million pounds behind those other leading clubs in terms of the wages which they are willing to spend. They could spend more. I don't think they can necessarily spend as 400 million. They've got to start winning trophies first, and it's this really awkward chicken and egg position. You can't pay the ultimate wages until you're winning trophies, and you're not going to win in trophies until you can start paying those ultimately high wages. You've got to punch above your weight.
Yeah, and that was a major difference, Kieran, wasn't it? Just to interact with you, when this big money came into the likes of Chelsea back in the day under Abramovich, to the likes of Manchester City, to the likes of Newcastle, where we know in the end it will start to filter through. The huge impact of that investment, and I think that comes back to what we were talking about earlier: is why do we need to take investment? Because actually, organically, we're growing very well. But organically, we're not growing quick enough just from an organic perspective. So you have to take outside investment against an asset that the club have created, the board have created, so that we can actually start to pay down 100, 120, 90, 100, 120 million pounds worth of more wages so we can catch up with the other bigger teams. Because like you said right at the beginning, football is a business. It is a money side of things. And actually, if we're only paying 5 or 6 times less than some of the other clubs, we're going to be behind, right? We're only all of the stuff that we're doing, all the revenue that we're generating, everything that we're talking about is only enabling us to kind of try and bridge the gap that was there 5 years ago. But the gap's starting to, it's always going. It's like if you don't make any signings for 518 days, like the mighty Tottenham Hotspur didn't, you're going backwards, aren't you? And that's the same on the financial side. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I think Spurs have. I'd give them 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s in terms of match day revenue, commercial revenue, broadcast revenue, as good as you can hope for. I'd probably give them a 4 out of 10 when it comes to player trading revenues. And that's the area they've got to concentrate on, because I appreciate that Chelsea are, dirty word, you look at the amount of money that Chelsea have generated over the course of the last decade from player sales, it's insane. It's £750 million. And
wow,
they were the first people to spot that using children as commodities, I know that's quite an inflammatory phrase, but that's what they've done. Yeah. Their academy has been a ridiculous earner for them. And Tammy Abrahams, Hudson-Odoi, Loftus-Cheek, Mason Mount, Billy Gilbert. You start to list all of these players, and it's pure profit. That's something that Spurs have to address.
100%. That's the point that I was making earlier about the academy piece as well. And I think the other key thing about Spurs, the chicken and egg piece, is that we sold our superstar. Now we probably did this, like, still in my view, wrong, because I don't think you can sanction selling Harry Kane. Scored 40 goals in 41 appearances for Bayern Munich in all competitions this season. Imagine that firepower in this side. We wouldn't be languishing in 5th. We probably would be having another at least 9 points or so in some of the matches. You can look at that. But you go back to Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp, amazing manager, amazing tenure at Liverpool, 7 years. In 8 years now, I think it is, and he's leaving. But their sliding doors moment arguably come against Spurs at Wembley when we battered them 4-1 and Lovren was on his backside. But what they actually did is they sold their superstar, Coutinho, for 140 odd million. And that was a catalyst, no? For them to be able to go on and get the players they needed. And it's really difficult because as fans, we're saying don't sell your superstars. But actually, you've got to be able to generate something to be able to get even better. And again, coming back to your club, Brighton, you've sold Basuma to us, you've sold Casado 115 million, you sold your manager to Chelsea, like to Togbo, Cucurella for 65 million, whatever else it is, and on and on and on and on. And you look at the generation of, the cash, the money that's generating. You have to be able to, as a club like Spurs or a club like Brighton, like whichever stages you're at, you have to be able to generate the money to be able to go, because it is about money. And none of us like that, but that's what it is, right?
Yeah. And then you've got to be able to then you've got to be able to spend it smartly. And if we go back to Spurs and Gareth Bale, I appreciate that's probably a scab that you're still picking at. You look at the players that Spurs signed.
I'd say one player out of that 7. It was a magnificent 7, wasn't it? And I think out of that, Christian Eriksen, who actually wasn't even that expensive. I think it was like 11.7 million or something ridiculous out of that lot. So Dardo came in. He weren't very good. Nasir Chadli, Red Paulinho, like all these players, right? Out of 7, and none of them had a legacy other than Christian Eriksen, really.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that point that Kieran makes there, and I think this is a common theme with Spurs, and you've said it before, Lee, that when they've gone big and spent big, hasn't always worked out, which again I think is a nature of why Spurs.
I don't think it ever has. What's the most expensive player we've signed that's actually been brilliant?
Probably you'd say at the moment Mickey van der Ven. You'd probably say Mickey's probably the most recent one where you say they've spent big money and it could hopefully work out. I think given his first season, it has. But look, I think what everyone does feel that, listen, it's always a fabulous show bringing you on, Kieran. I've got to say, listen, we've had over nearly 3,000 of you that have watched this show live with us. So again, thank you so much for all your incredible support for the show. Given we're not even here talking about a match week, but again, it just shows the credence that, of course, Lee McQueen and this wonderful man, Kieran Maguire, holds when he comes on and pays us a visit on Last Word on Spurs. Kieran, look, you've got a wonderful podcast out that more people, I feel, need to know more about. They know a lot about it already. Where can many people find the wonderful work you do? And what I've got to say now is, for you as always, I think it's a daily, it's an hourly, second basis, Kieran, at the moment.
I do a podcast with comedian Kevin Day called The Price of Football. We do normally 2 shows a week. Sometimes, quite often now, 3. We've got guests. We've got the quality of the guests has certainly changed. All of them been absolutely brilliant. And this Wednesday we are interviewing the sports minister, all about the independent regulator, and it's been great for me, in terms of developing my profile and career. And we think we're doing some good for football, because we're standing up for Oldham Athletic and Torquay and West Bromwich Albion and Reading about those issues, as well as dealing with the big issues in football as well. So, as I said to you before we started recording the show, I'm going to Buckingham Palace in 2 weeks on the back of the podcast for services to football. And I was born in Bermondsey, so going north of the river is always a little bit dodgy for me. But on this one occasion, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, the biggest comment I can pay you is that I think for anybody out there, no matter what football club it is that do a lot of content around their own particular fan base, and that we do Spurs, of course, here, that whenever there's a football financial situation, the one man they all want to turn to first is Kieran Maguire. So that's the biggest comment I can pay you. And again, why we're always so humbled and blessed, Lee, to have this man join us, right?
No, 100%. I mean, these shows are brilliant. They're fascinating for us. We learn everything, through the show as well. I'm loving Kieran's England top as well. It's got John Barnes vibes about it. I might have the era wrong, but it definitely has got John Barnes vibes about it. And also as well, I just want to give out a bit of a personal shout. Actually, friend of the show, really good friend of the show, Richard Whitehead, MBE, aka the Marathon Champ. So at Marathon Champ on X. He became a world record holder today when he ran the London Marathon in a world record time for the LA Freeze marathon. And go and check him out. He's an unbelievable guy, unbelievable inspiration, and a top guy and my friend. So big shout out to Richard Whitehead, MBE marathon champ, absolutely brilliant friend of the show. And we absolutely love him.
Absolutely.
So fair play to him today running the London Marathon, mate.
Oh man, and for those out there that have done that, listen, good on them. And for those I'm sure I've been training for that, listen to the last one of Spurs podcast. For those Spurs fanatics out there who've been doing the marathon, I'm sure there's many. So listen, love goes out to those again, as always. And all I can say again is thank you so much for all your support. Again, Kieran, thank you so much for your time. We wish you the best of luck. Not that you're going to need it down Buckingham Palace. And I'm sure that'll be one of many, many more visits coming your way with Kings and God knows what's to come in your life, my man. We absolutely love it. And keep teaching Ben well for us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, guys. It's always an absolute privilege to have a chat with you on an annual basis. And also the fact that Spurs are rarely on the Price of Football podcast. That's a really good, because we just deal with the bad stories.
Yo, it's a really good point you make there.
Quite a lot, then.
Or coming to be. Listen, massively, again, fascinating stuff with Kieran. Guys, thank you so much for your support from myself, from Lee, from the wonderful Kieran Maguire. We've been the last word on Spurs. We're coming towards North London Derby takeover. We'll see you later in the week. From myself, from Macca, from the wonderful Kieran Maguire. Take care. And as always,